Powers.
Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
It's very sad that previous speaker's been in here 40 or so years, and all he can do is give one speech, a vain popping performance, not look at the legislation, simply stand up and rave. And it's particularly contemptible when one considers that he was Minister of Foreign Affairs for some time until he had to hand over to Winston, and then he was Minister of Defence, because, as he says, he's worked with these agencies.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallett.
Mr Chairman, there are a number of ways in which Mr Peters can be described. The Right Honourable Member.
Sure, thank you. I'll thank the member. From now on, we will address members by their correct titles, please. The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Oh yes, the Right Honourable Winston Peters, such a distinguished member of this place. But Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, what we're getting from the Green Party is a perfectly acceptable approach for the Green Party. So, for example, when looking at Clause 6, which deals with, among other things, introducing a new Section 7, their approach was utterly predictable and utterly principled. They don't believe in the GCSB. They don't believe that there should be anything to deal with the economic well-being of New Zealand. Their approach in 2001 through 2003 was that there should be no GCSB. Their approach today is that, and they have raised their points of objection in a principled way, but not so the Labour Party. Their approach, quite frankly, is utterly contemptible. It is a willful misreading of the legislation before the House. They go on and on and on, for example, about safeguards. They haven't referred to one of the safeguards that are set out in this bill that deals with. Are they in favour of the privacy requirements that I went through in some detail? Are they in favour of some of the other safeguards? Willful ignorance of them, but rather just a yelling and screaming function. And I find it very disappointing when there is such a major piece of legislation before the House, where there used to be a cross-party consensus on these matters, but they have shattered it. But let's look at Clause 6. I've dealt with the new Section 7, and in my first call I went into some detail. Well, it wasn't a dissertation, I say to Mr Cosgrove. It was a very careful analysis of each of the key clauses to inform the debate, but regrettably they weren't listening. That maybe they've been at the Saunders-Unsworth function too long, because they stood up and yelled and screamed. But let's look at Clause 6, because I've dealt with the new Section 7, and then I spoke at some length about the new Section 8, 8A, down to 8CA. Let's go through it again. Section 8 is designed to spell out very clearly the functions of the Bureau. And so the new Section 8A, introduced by Clause 6, deals with information assurance and cyber security. 8B, a very important one, which I'll come to again in some detail in a few seconds, deals with intelligence gathering and analysis. And 8C, cooperation with other entities. And I have to say that I believe that the SOP proposed in relation to the new Section 8C by Mr Dunn is a very good piece of work, and we'll certainly be supporting it. Tightens it up even more so that it refers to only the police, the Defence Force and the Security Intelligence Service. And then we come over to the clause that the Labour Party keeps ignoring, and that is the rewrite of the existing Section 14. If one looks at Clause 12, one sees the rewrite. Now, the current Section 14 was intended to codify the basic requirement, Mr Chair, underpinning the operations of the GCSB, that it wasn't to conduct foreign intelligence activities against New Zealanders. And that's been the section where we've come into a bit of rough water in recent times, and rough water when they were in power and the member for Roskill was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Defence. The way the basic premise was incorporated into the 2003 Act meant that it applied not only to the foreign intelligence function but also to its other two functions. So what are we doing here? we are rewriting Section 14, incorporated by Clause 12. It's a critically important clause, and what it does is it clarifies the basic premise that there is to be no spying on New Zealanders, and Mr. Chair, specifically refers to the foreign intelligence function in the new Section 8B. Read the words of clause of the new Section 14.1, and one sees that the purpose is clarified and the safeguards are also spelt out in some considerable detail in Part 1. So what we've had, and I'm sorry, the Law Society is wrong. The Law Society is wrong, and what's more than a few members of the profession, have expressed their concerns to me about the way their submissions were given by someone who then went to the Mount Albert Memorial Hall and was making all sorts of extravagant comments, someone who used to act for Mr. Zowie, and at the same time was purporting to represent the Law Society. The thing about the Law Society, to quote a former United States judge, it's the bar that makes the statutes, and it's a very important function the Law Society fulfills, to come down to this place to give governments of all persuasion a good swift kick from time to time, but do so in an impartial and professional way. And regrettably, the standards were not applied in the case of the submissions on this legislation, and there'll be more about that later.
Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Yeah, I find that speech, when it talked about politics